So the first thing we are going to do is that we're going to make sure the grid is set up for this. So I'm going to hit G to display my grid. Now, if you're not using a template and you're using the default settings, you'll need to make sure you set up your grid settings as well. So I'm going to go right up to here to my snap toggle, right click, and I want to go here to my home grid. Typically, I use a size of 50. I think 50 is a really great measurement to use, just because it's going to be big enough, but yet not too small. Because if it's too small, it's going to be a little bit finicky to make such precision assets. So I think 50 is going to be a good measurement. Now, with that set, you want to make sure under snaps you have grid points enabled. Next, we want to start creating some lines on the kind of modules we want to have, right? Now, this is actually pretty straightforward. If I hold down Control, right click, this is actually a convenient, fast way of creating a line or a box. I can click on line, and if I press S, I can snap to my grid points. So I'm going to left click. I'm just going to make this a straight module piece. And then I'll make this one a small module piece. I'll make this one a curved or an edge. And I'll make this an inner edge. Like that. All right. So now what I'll need to do is I'll need to attach all of these together so that it's one whole object. There we go. So you can see it's one whole object. Now I kind of need to design the profile of what my modules are going to look like. Now, there would be no point on doing this if this is just going to be a straight flat wall. But if this is going to be something with a lot of interesting silhouette changes, trims, all that, then this is a way that you can definitely create modules. In fact, we're going to create some sci-fi modules with this. So I'm going to create another line, but this line is going to be more on designing on what I want. So I'm going to hold down, I'm just going to press S, and I'm going to hold down Control, right click, click line. Let's create a basic line here. So I know that each cube here, each tile is about 50 units. And it's about 180 to be one full character height. So this is how I can really kind of decipher on how tall I want the walls to be. So maybe I'll do that. Yeah, so something probably that big. Now, right now, this is just kind of a proportion kind of shot so I can understand how big I want this to be. I'm going to create it again, but this time I'm going to only create one straight edge. I'm going to press S to disable my snapping, and I'm going to put some manual options in here. Make it trim. I can always readjust this afterwards as well. Okay. So what I can do here is if I select this shape, you can see it's a fully solid shape. It's completely welded, so it's a solid shape. I'm going to go here to my tools or to my line that I created, the module line. And I want to add this modifier called sweep. Should be only available under a line tool. So if I click on sweep, sweep. So what it does is that it takes an angle and it tries to follow that angle throughout the whole line. Now what I can do is I can click on use custom shape, pick this shape, and you can see what it did. Create our shape here. Now a couple options here need to be kind of fixed. For example, the angle. We set this to negative 90. And although that is done, something that needs to be worked on is the pivot points. So if I go right down here, I can decide where the pivot point is going to be. So if I put it at the very bottom here, very corner, it's going to sit at the very corner. And now you can see it's going to line up perfectly fine. This one is not. Now why? Well, it's actually a very, very subtle reason. But if you look at these lines, you're going to see that this is your very first point. This is your second point and third point. So because this is our first point going to second, first point going to second, you can see on exactly why. Now if I select this, I should be able to click on reverse. I should, you know what, let me press 2, select on these edges. Actually, no. Reverse. Ah, there we go. So I have to be in segment mode, spline mode. Select the whole spline and then I can click reverse. And now that should work. Now it's being flipped. Yeah, so as you can see, it's working as intended, except this is obviously super off. So ways I can fix that are really easy. All I need to do is come to this line and I can easily just adjust these points as I see fit. As you can see, it's a very convenient way to model because I can take these measurements, I can readjust it. On all the modules. All right, so although I do want this pushed in, I don't want to push in too much. So I'll do that. That. Okay. Now here's some other cool things I can do. I can add additional details to this to make it look really interesting. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go on top view. I'm going to press U to go on orthographic. And I'm going to create some shapes. I'm going to create a circle. And I'll make this look like wires. Yeah, I'll add some depth here. Copy. Okay. Now let me actually leave that the way it is. So now what I can do is that under this line, I can attach it. And we can see what happens when I start attaching it. And so you can see that now we have this all fully connected. I'm going to just throw on a material here so we can see a little bit better. But this is what I mean about procedural workflow, because this is fully procedural, which means I can fully edit this and figure it as I would like. Other tips is if I select this, I can add more modifiers. I can add a chamfer modifier. Right, so I'm going to increase that a bit. Press F4. So you're going to notice this kind of weird highlight happening. Now that, I did tell you guys before, that's because of your weighted normals. So if I throw on weighted normals as a modifier, it'll fix that based on smoothing groups. So now you can see that looks much nicer. We have the chamfers coming in. Cool. Now let's do some more details, right? Let's do as much details as possible. So here, I'm going to create some more boxes. In fact, again, hold down Control, right click, go to rectangle, and let me add some detail here. Add some copies, remove. Now, of course, I will attach. Understand that this only works when it's going horizontal, right? When it goes vertically, you would have to manually do some edits. You can see that looks pretty good. Okay. Now, some other tools we can look at is the Boolean tool. Boolean tool is a very interesting tool. So I'm going to select on this. We're not going to use Boolean for polygons, but Boolean for shapes. So I'm going to take a shape here. I'm going to select this shape. I'm going to go here to the Create tab. I'm going to go here to my spline shapes, compound shapes, shape Boolean. And now we need to start adding or subtracting things. So I'm going to hold down Control, right click. I'm going to create a circle. All right, now this circle, I'm going to put it, say, right here, like that. And now what I can do with the Boolean is go to my operations, add operation, add. And you can see now that's added. And if I wanted to move that around, that is actually very simple. If I click on select operations, I should be able to move it around. I can change the size. And you see this little bar here? This bar means that this is independent than what's actually being looked at here. And that's why when I move this here, nothing's actually updating here. But if I move this down below this line, I might actually not be able to do that. Yeah, you know what? Booleans are not able to be instanced. So I would have to collapse it and readjust it. So I'd have to do this, collapse it. And now when I select this, go back to sweep, pick, there we go. It's very clean. All right. Let's add some more boxes here. just as an example of detail. And I'm not going to weld it together or anything. I'm just going to attach it. All right, cool. So there's still a lot we could actually do with this. In fact, here's some more cool examples. Um, See, I could select this. In fact, you know what? If I don't like this corner piece, I could just make it bigger. So let me hide that. Actually, you know what? Here's another cool thing we can do. If I select this, I could select all these modifiers, right click, cut all those modifiers. And now if I make a copy of this, now we often use obviously copy. Copy is pretty straightforward. It makes a copy of the object. We use instance, of course. Instance is pretty straightforward as well. Whenever you make changes to one, it automatically affects the other. If you affect the other, it automatically makes changes to original. So that's what instance is. So what is reference? Reference is actually just kind of a merge of both. So what it does is that a reference is exactly like an instance, except you do have an option of making parts of it unique. So this is what I mean. If I hit OK to reference, technically, whatever, if I change this line, it's automatically going to change this line. However, if you guys look closely, you're going to see there's a bar right over here. So this bar basically means that anything below this bar is being instanced, but anything above this bar is unique. So if I press paste, and right now it's above that bar, it means that these are unique to this one object. Meanwhile, the original does not have that. But if I decide to change this line, that part is being instanced. So what's cool is that if I wanted to add, say, interesting sections to this, I can go to Insert. And you can kind of see that I can create different style sections pretty easily. Right now it's pretty laggy because it's trying to do it in real time. But yeah, pretty cool. What I'll do is that I'll make a copy of this. Actually, let me just isolate it. And now I'm going to go to create, create line. I'll hit S. Okay. Maybe I'll use something like fillet, which is almost like chamfer, but it makes it really smooth. Maybe just something like that, right? It doesn't have to look too fancy. This is just kind of give you guys an idea of what's possible with this. So now if I do end isolate, you can see now this line has updated and we have a shape here. I can add things like turbo smooth. Turbo smooth would need to have some support edges on the sides and some support edges, but you can see it's a pretty easy way of adding on detail and keeping it consistent and flowing. It really depends, but I would say when it comes to sci-fi is something that you'd use pretty often to make something pretty quickly. But yeah, usually you'd always have concepts to justify what you'd want, and then you as an artist will justify on, what methods I can use. But I would say even for things like rails, right? If you wanted to make a railing, it's actually super easy to do it this way because, imagine if I had, say, a cylinder, or not even a cylinder, but let's just say any type of shape. So if this was, for example, my ground, all I would really have to do is just get this line. So hold down Shift, click on edge mode. Once I have that edge, I can click on create shape and just make sure that shape is completely by corner. And essentially we could do the exact same thing to this, right? If I want to do like a railing, let me get rid of one part here so I don't have a consistent railing. Or unless I wanted that. But let me do a circle. Circle. And let's say a square at the bottom for its base. Okay. I'll change the size of that. Maybe make that a little bit bigger. That a little smaller. Okay. So I'll attach these together with edit spline. Attach them together. And now here, I'll add a sweep. Pick my shape there. So a pretty clever way of doing rails. Right now, I would also have to do like a path to form. So let me do this. Hold shift, make another copy of this. Actually, you know what? I could just do Control V and just do a copy. Right, now I'll delete sweep on one of them. Actually, I think it's instance. No, it's not instance. Okay. Yeah, it's not instance. Let me hide that for a second. So on this one, I can just make a straight line. Well, not a straight line, but let's say a pole. We set this to 11, 11. Okay. Path to form, pick, move to path, change the orientation. Great. So you can see when I push it, the X forms kind of do get messed up. When you push it, it goes in different directions. But you'll find one push in one direction that follows the whole curve. And then all I would have to do here is unhide all, hold shift. I could do instance. And now to create a whole bunch. So I definitely see a lot of workflows where this could be quite useful and would save potentially a lot of time. But of course, it just depends on your imagination. But yeah, definitely some powerful tools to take a hold of. Anyways, let's continue on with this. Okay. So what I'll do is I won't make all the pieces, but I'll finish up one and we'll texture one and we'll see how that looks like. Um, but yeah, for something like this, it's super powerful. It'll definitely save you a lot of time. Yep, module sections. So it'll be basically like this. So basically take that exact same shape I did and you create this, right? And they'll give you your different module pieces. So you'll have one of a curved, you'll have one that's a smaller edge, one that'll be a longer, basically the exact same idea, right? The only reason I showed you how to take it from a shape is that if you want to have a railing follow a longer shape or have something follow towards on the actual surface. Any more questions? No? Okay. All right. So let's continue on with these shapes. What I'll do is I'll start making my low poly. But before I do that, I'll put some more shapes in here. Just because usually I want to have some dimensions in the inside so that when I rotate it, I'll be able to see some more details. So not just a polygon in the inside. And it's actually fairly easy to do that. Hold down Control, right click on rectangle. Actually, let me use circle. Add a whole bunch. Okay. And I'm going to attach these. That I don't need. Okay. And here, let me put some rectangles instead. Okay. All right, so we got that. So you can see it didn't update. So I might have to just go down right here to sweep, pick. All right, there we go. Okay. So now that we have this, I'm going to save up my file. So what we'll do now is that we'll start prepping this for a high poly bake. And then we'll make our low poly. So I'll just make the simple piece, this right here. So what I'll do is I'm going to put an edit poly on this. And the edit poly is going to allow me to make selections and then to detach copies. So I'll select this. I'll hold down Control and Shift and then drag. There we go. And just need to hit detach or clone. Okay. I'm going to hit Alt Q, isolate it. All right, so now with our high poly, we want to set up material ID maps to make texturing pretty simple. So I'm going to get multi-material here. Yep, but the sides, you'll never see the sides. So with the idea with a module is that you'll never see this, and this is a high poly. So because this is a high poly and you'll never see this, we're not worrying about this at all. Okay, so I'm gonna type in sub-objects, multi-sub-object. All right, now we need to use different materials. Yep, but this is supposed to look like a panel, right? So the idea is that this is one panel and then another panel. The only time you want it to have it removed is perhaps for these wires here, because you'd want that to be consistent. Okay, so I'm going to create a material. Now, usually I use standard material to assign material IDs, just because PBR sometimes that doesn't work, and standard you wouldn't be able to find just by typing standard. What you'd have to do is change renderer to scanline renderer. And once you do that, you should be able to see standard legacy. So I know by using this, you'll always have it show up in Subsense. Sometimes I've used the PBR ones and they haven't done that. So I'm just going to connect this. All right, I'm going to double click. I'm going to set this to red. Double click on material. I'm just going to name this base. And I'm going to make a whole bunch of different copies of this. So I'm going to drag, copy. And I'm going to change all these colors. So you want to make sure they're completely different colors. This way it doesn't bleed over, especially when you're trying to do selections inside of Subsense. I'm going to drag this on. And now start assigning. In fact, it'll probably be easier if I just select this. Hit Control I to invert it and just deselect the other elements. Yep. Okay. I'll set this to ID2. Wires. And I'll have these also set. I'll set these as well. Cool. Okay, so now I'm going to call that edge detail. And we'll create some more. This will just help us with texturing. But right now we have quite a bit. Probably, maybe right here we'll add a different trim. I'll press 4. I'll select this polygon. I'll click expand. Material ID 4. Okay. I might also want to have like a light strip. So maybe I'll make, this like a light strip. So I'll select that. I'll set this to 6, 5. Emissive. And I'll name this trim. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. It's just the sides. And let me put this with something as well. Hold Control, or hold Shift, or left click, drag down, and grow. And I'll set this to ID 6. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to create our low poly. So the best way I would recommend creating the low poly is, again, using the silhouette. So what we could do, I'm going to just end isolation. I'll go right here. I'm going to make a copy of this. Now, a lot of these elements we're not going to need for the low poly. And some of these elements, it's probably just going to be better if they're welded, right? You don't want to have this face inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start optimizing some of this. And I'm also going to use the Boolean tool. So I'm going to create a rectangle right in here. And I'll create another one. Now here I'll go and I'll add a Boolean, add operation, and I will select that operation. There we go. I do want to have some silhouette. So I think something like that should be good. I'll optimize this later on. I'll clean that up. Same thing here I can do. Okay. All right. That little line I got to clean up. But as you can see, it's close and it's connected. It's good. These inside here, I don't necessarily need. I could just delete them. Some of these I need to also connect. You could also do this. Like right now, I'm just trying to connect them by putting another Boolean right next to it. But in theory, what I could do, let me remove that. In theory, what I can do is I could just make this into an editable spline. And I could deattach this and just add as a Boolean later on. So let me actually do that. It'll probably be a lot easier. That, and that. And now with that selected, I can deattach it. Okay, so now I'm going to add a Boolean. Add. There we go. Solid shape. So now I'm going to collapse. Editable spline. I'm going to change this all to corner pieces. Actually, you can see I can't change it to corner because if I do, it's going to ruin some of these surfaces. So what I'll do is, you know what, I can just turn this to an edit poly and I can do it that way. Yeah, so let me change this to an editable poly. Right now you can see that doesn't actually work because something about this big shape is not solid. It's not welded. So I need to make sure everything here is welded. Not too much. Okay. And what I can do about this is that if I go into interpolation, right here, I can change the size. Okay. You know what? Let me undo that. I can tell I lost some detail. I welded it. So I'm going to change this to corner. Actually, I can't change them all to corner. So I have to kind of decide. Yes, I am. Okay. Let me lower this. Okay. Edit poly. So now with edit poly, what I'll do is I'll start cleaning up some of these sections I do not need. This I could delete. Now this I don't need to have an inside, so I can just delete this. But I'll need to connect the inside first, so that when I delete this, I still get half of it. Right, so seeing it's all about the little things that you actually need. Same thing here. Delete. And now here, there's a lot of geometry, and this is what I always mention, that it doesn't really make sense if this has just as much geometry as this, right? So this definitely needs to be cleaned up. Best way to do that, I'm going to select some edges. So maybe I'll select 3 edges. Yeah, let me do this. Like that. And then I'll collapse it, Control-Alt-C to collapse it. This right here, I need to weld it. This right here is causing a concave edge. This could be fixed just by doing a connection. Cool, cool, cool. Even down here, technically, I don't need to have an extra polygon here. I can have these collapsed. So let me collapse these. Okay. And then right down here, weld this. And then this right here, I need to move it down here. So if I move it with my constraints, press S, I can use snapping. I just need to make sure that I have snapping enabled by vertex. Snap. And now weld. There we go. This looks good. So this needs to be connected right here. Cool. All right, overall pretty good. So now what I can do is I'm going to take this shape. I'm going to set my pivot points to be right at the very corner here. I'm going to press E and then rotate this 90 degrees. I'm going to set it to 0, 0, 0. And in here, I'm going to set my pivot point. I might have to, yeah, I think that should work. Let's see. Might be a little bit off because of the chamfer. Now it's good. Great. All right. So let me select both these pieces again. Effect pivot only. Set it to 0, 0, 0. Okay. So now I'll select on the shape, go into border mode, hold shift and drag. Hit cap. And there we go. All right, so that's basically what you need to do, and you can see it's a low poly. Last thing I'll need to do is delete any polygons that I do not need. Now, we did talk about how the sides, how the top or the back, you will need it because of light and how that can penetrate through it. So this time I will not delete the back side. The sides here, you can definitely delete these because not only is it a big n-gon, but it'll never be seen because if you made your module correctly, it'll be perfectly aligned. So I'm going to click on biangle, delete that, delete that, delete that. Especially it makes your job on unwrapping a lot easier if you don't have any of these polygons because you'll have to deal with it once you unwrap it. Now, what else can I delete? What more can I optimize here? Well, the very back, right? Technically, these backs, I do not need them. Even if you think, well, wouldn't light be able to penetrate them? Well, technically not because there's a face here, as long as there is at least one face. Delete it. And there we go. So I'm going to go into my layers. I'm going to create a brand new layer, add layer to color to selection. I'm going to rename this low poly. Name it low poly. And now my high poly. High poly. Okay. Okay. Looks pretty good. All right. So we do have a chamfer on the high poly, right? And that's completely fine because I do plan for my high poly to have a chamfer where there is essentially going to be a tile. But I don't want that to apply for any of my cylinders. There's actually a very easy way to fix that to prevent this to become part of your normal map. All you have to do is just do this. Control I, invert selection. And now I can just increase this. Now I actually only want to do it on the wires here. So these, I do want them to actually cause a seam. Just not in here. Great. So I could just increase that. So if I increase it, it'll become seamless. What else? So now we have that. We have our low poly. We need to unwrap our low poly. So let's do that. Now I'm going to do this pretty quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time unwrapping it. But the first thing I want to do is set it to auto smooth. What was I increasing? Um, right here, just this. I made this go beyond the boundary, and that's so that you don't see the seam, not the seam, but the chamfer bake down, because technically, because this is on an angle, this would bake in on an angle and it would cause a little seam there. I'm completely fine with that for this because I want this to kind of look like a huge tile or huge panel, but the wires should definitely be consistent. So by me doing that, it's going to prevent a line from being created here. Okay, so we got that. Now we have to unwrap this. All right, so unwrap by smoothing group. Everything is on a different smoothing group, so I actually gotta set my smoothing groups first. Auto smooth. Let me also set this to gray tone so I can see it better. Okay, that should be good. Unwrap. Select that. Flatten smoothing group. Relax. Show my UVs. Okay, I'm gonna have to go to my dialog settings here and just change this so that it tiles a lot more. So under checker tiling, maybe set that to 10. Hit OK. There we go. So I just want to make sure that everything is coming in properly here. And this should be a good test. Some parts here are broken up in a lot of pieces. Okay, that looks good. That's fine. As long as it's broken on 45-degree angles, it's fine. Okay, looks great. So what I'll do here is I'll select this. And there's only one thing I want to do now is that, remember, this and this, technically this as well, this I should actually just delete it. But this is not going to be important, right? This is not going to really receive texture data. So I can move this on the outside and I'll repack this. Do it very quickly. Normally I would do this all by hand. Okay, so that's pretty much the best that it's going to do for us. And this we can just change the texture density. It's not going to really matter because we're never going to really see it. Doesn't even need to be in this to be honest. But everything else is fine. Okay. So now that's unwrapped. That's good. Now we do want to use that modifier we talked about before, we used before, uh, text tools to set the smoothing groups by UV shells. Okay. So this right here, we'll download it and just need to drag it, drop it inside of our viewport to install it. Tools, smoothing groups from UV shells. So this just helps you get better baking results, so I highly recommend it. Next, I'm going to add a weighted normals and click on use smoothing groups. Okay. Great. I'm going to collapse my whole stack. And we can start exporting this out. Now, before I do that, let me just delete the polygon I don't need. So the bottom one I'll definitely never need. It's only the top you'll need and the back that you'll need. The sides, technically, you'll never need them because you'll have pieces that would block that side from being shown. So now I'll select this, File, Export, Export selected. Save this. Underscore O low. So I'll name it wall 01 underscore low. Okay. So now it's going to be our high poly. File, export, export selected. Hit save. Hit OK. Now, typically I would have like the wires on a completely different object, so you can do bi-mesh baking and it would be perfect. But because they're not really going through another mesh, as long as you keep the distances pretty low on the frontal distance, you won't have any bleeding. All right, let's open up Substance Painter. File, New, Select. Put up by low, hit OK. All right, I'll hit Control Shift B to open up our baking settings. We'll just do a normal map bake to see if it's working correctly. And we'll set it to 2K. And we'll load the high bake. Going to normal plus height. Okay. Awesome. So we also need to do our bake of our ID maps that we set up on our high poly. So I'll enable everything now. Under IDs, just make sure this is set to material color because that's what we set up in 3ds Max with material colors. And we will see if this works out correctly. I'm going to make sure my match or my anti-aliasing is, I'll set it to 4x4. Typically I would set this to 8x8, but I don't want to wait too long for something that is just a toggle. But yeah, I'd always recommend 8x8 for your personal work. Hit OK. All right, there we go. And you can see the nice shadows being baked in there. So it really does give this feel of dimension. Okay. So I'm just going to throw some basic colors onto this and use some of these materials. Let's use a rough steel. Going to add mask with color selection. Pick. Let's pick that. Change the tint as well. add a rubber material. Okay, I'll add a mask with color selection. Pick the wires. Let me use another metallic color here. This one's a little bit scratched. Let me go to materials basic. Mask with color selection, pick the bar right up here. We'll also learn how to do it in emissive map because we do plan to have that kind of glow out. If anything, we can actually make this to glow. Might actually look better with this glowing. All right, so let's see about this steel painted. Okay. So let's make this bar glow. What I'll need to do is I'll need to add a new map. Channels, add, emissive. I need to go onto shader settings and change our shader to allow for that. Actually, on default, it does that. It's only for transparent materials you would have to do that. So yeah, emissive, that's working perfectly fine. And under layers, you know what? Let me create a brand new layer for this. I won't even use this. I'm going to create a fill layer. I'll call it emissive. And let me make the off color when it's not glowing black. And when it's glowing, emissive, we'll make it a nice orange color. And I'll add mask with color selection, pick. We'll pick that bar. Right, so it's definitely going to look a lot better inside the Unreal Engine because it won't create a post-processing effect inside of Substance Painter. Okay. Now, let me add a little bit more effects to it. Add mask with color selection, pick. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to use some of these generators. Yeah, you would have to adjust the actual value inside of Unreal. Because the way it works in Unreal is that anything that is black is not emissive and will not glow at all, and it will receive shadow information. If something is set to the value of 1, which is usually the maximum value, all that means 1 means it will not receive any shadows in Unreal. It won't glow, but it won't receive shadows. So it will give the illusion that it's glowing. But anything above 1 would increase the glow intensity, and that's essentially the key to make it look good. So what I'll do is that after we're done this, we'll just put inside of Unreal and we'll take a look of what emissive would look like and how to set that up as a map. Okay, so I'm just going to throw some generators here. We use scratched metal or rough. Add a black mask, add a generator. On that generator, metal edges. All right, so although that's making my corners a lot more rough as I'd want, it's also making the wires roughed out. And obviously the wires are not supposed to look scratched because they are wires, they're rubber. So I need to add an exemption here so that it does not affect the wires and everything else. And that's easy. If I go to add paint, I can go to polygon paints. Just make sure I have element mode on so it's super easy to select. And if I left click, right now I'm actually adding it. So instead of adding it, let me go to black to remove it. Okay, so I still got that detail there, got that. Perfect. I can add small little effects, like maybe I want to add a gradient, add a black mask, add a generator, 3D linear gradient. So you can see how that looks like. Maybe make it metallic. And I'll move this to the bottom. So it affects only the steel. And that way I can make it this darker as well. Okay. Increase the roughness. All right, so let's use some hard stamps as well. So I'm going to create an actual brush layer. And actually create it right down here. Well, that's fine. We can create it way down there. I'll call it a hard surface, hard surfaces. Go to hard surfaces right down here. Okay. And then here I just want to drag over the normal map. So I'm going to drag over a normal. Let me pick the right one. Let's try this panel. I'm going to disable everything except normal. And you also want to make sure that your alpha is disabled for this, because you see what happens is that if you increase your brush size and you stamp, you're going to notice that the corners are faded. So what you need to do is remove the alpha so it gets with its original alpha without actually distorting the edges with a fade out. And you could also do this with inside your UVs. I hold shift, I'll drag a line. I won't put too many. This is more better to be smaller details. So I'll go right down here. You could also do a whole tile like that. What you need to do is kind of just increase your spacing. Right? And what I can do is if I look at this on the actual map here, it's right here. And I could just go to the very top, left click, hold shift and control, and left click. You can see it creates that nice detail there. Let me actually do it again. Okay. Yeah, so you could do straight lines on the viewport, but realistically, it's not going to factor in that it's on an angle. So usually straight lines would probably be very best using the UVs. Too many lines. We got some panels. But remember the one cool trick I told you guys that you can do is that with this layer, you can add an anchor point. With that anchor point, if you go to that effect that's being generated, I think it's under steel. No, it's actually way up here. Roughness, there we go. So if I select this, I can go to my metal edge wear. I want to go scrolling down to micro details. Under height, micro height, I'm going to turn that to true. Now under micro normal, actually it's micro normal I want on. Under micro normal, I can go to anchor points, click on hard surfaces, and I'll switch that to normal. So now you can see that it's actually affecting my stamps. And this all can be readjusted here under the micro detail settings. We can actually control, how strong this effect does affect the brushes that you stamped in. So that we have that. And you can see that's creating its own. Okay, awesome. So now we'll do some dirt. Dirt I'll do pretty quickly. I'll just create a fill layer. I'll call it dirt. I'll use a color to justify how the dirt's going to look like. I'll use red just because red is going to really stand out, and I can always change the color afterwards with my workflow. I'm going to add a fill layer, and on that fill layer, I'm going to use some procedurals, black and white spots. For roughness, I'll also use black and white spots. I'll increase the balance to make it even more rough. And what I want to do now is that under my paint layer, so back in my original layer, I just want to multiply this together. And now if I change this color to something that resembles dirt, there we go. Looks like dirt. Great. So now I'm going to add a generator, add black mask, add a generator, and I'll add dirt generation. So this actually uses your ambient occlusion map to know where shadows are actually going to be placed, and it places them right in those areas. So usually you can see there's a lot of dirt in here because this is being, has a lot of ambient occlusion. Okay. So you can see this is kind of like a Fallout type of look where it's sci-fi, but really dinged up. All right. Now, one thing to kind of just mention is that another way you can basically paint this, because I know, of course, if you're doing your other pieces, you would have to unwrap them as well, and then you would have to repaint them. But there's actually a super quick way you could do this, is that as long as you're using the exact same material setup with the exact same material colors, what you could do is that you could put all of these layers into a smart layer. So if you create a folder, Control G, while having it selected, you can name this like wall 1. If you right click, you can create it into a smart material. And that means that it'll become a smart material, it'll be placed right here, and you can just drag it onto your model and it'll automatically paint it with all of the layers that you set up. So it'll use all the presets and it'll automatically paint it, right? So it's actually really cool. The only exception is that anything that was manually placed with the UVs, like the stamps, because they were placed with precision rather than generation, it's not going to work over. It's not going to kind of work, but everything else would. All the other materials would, because remember, this is painting this not because I decided to paint on this location, but because my material ID map said only paint on this color. So as long as you follow that same color rubric for the other pieces, it should be as simple as dragging and dropping. Okay, so we want to export this out. We want to put it inside of Unreal, and we want to set some of these objects up. So of course the module asset's going to work, but let's also get admissive and set that up. All right, so let's export this out. File, export textures. Okay, Unreal 4. Targa. So I know you guys have seen this map, or you've been explained this quite a few times from Jamie, so I'm not going to go over it. Dilation, dilation plus transparent. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Export. Okay, Unreal. So now we'll open up Unreal and we will take a look at it on how it looks inside the game engine. Okay. So we got this open. I think I have a sci-fi map here with other modules I created. So this is actually what I created in the last class. See the miss of working there. So let's get this set up. I'm going to create a new folder. Class O2. Let me drag over my assets. Do 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 do. Here we go. The wall as well. Import all. I don't need to have this material. Okay. Now, FYI, your ARM map, you always need to make sure you disable sRGB. Hit save. I'm going to create a new material. I'm going to name it M_wall. Double click. And let's throw this all in here. I'm going to select all four, drag them all four in. I'm going to spread these apart. I'm going to select these and just hit Shift A to align them. And I'll plug them in. So this is our ARM map. ARM, ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic. Here is our normal map, and here is our admissive map. So this is where I was talking about before, is that you see, you're going to plug this in and you're going to notice that it's not going to work on the kind of emissive that you might want. So we'll talk about that in a second. So if I drag this in, drag on my material, you can see it's right there. Okay, that's actually glowing pretty much, but I think that's because right now we're in complete darkness. But if you want to increase that strength, what you would have to do is under that material, you would have to multiply this. So if you hold down the M key, M, left click, create a multiply, drag that into A, and then here you need to create a parameter in order to control the intensity. So if you hold down the S key, left click, you'll create a scalar parameter. So here, I'm just going to name this admissive. I'll leave the default value to 0 so that it's off on default. And now I'll plug this into admissive and I'll hit apply. Cool. Now, one thing I need to do is I need to make this an instance. So if I right click material instance, so create material instance, I can assign that onto my object. And now the moment of truth. If I double click on this, you can see that I have the emissive parameter here. And if I left click and drag, you can see it glows. Right, and we can make it nice and glow like that. If I want to use the grid, I just need to make sure that this asset is set to the grid. Easiest way, just make sure that grid is on. And if you throw this object into your scene, it should automatically snap onto the grid. So I'll take this and I'll move it right here. I'll move this to 0. Okay. All right. I'm going to hold down Alt, drag, and make copies. Okay. You know what? This actually has two objects inside one another. So let me do this. Select all of these objects. These ones here. This little back. Okay. Cool. So now you can see that we have a lot of information here, especially at the very back. You can see that this is generating shadows on the inside. It's exactly what I wanted to do. Can change the lights. Yeah, pretty cool. Normally you wouldn't just make a straight line like this unless it's supposed to be like a road or something. But essentially, if you had a column, you could put a column right in between this and it would break up the effect. And if you use that pattern, you had different module sets, it would be pretty easy to do an interconnection of this, right? I think doing a pillar like in between these sections would actually make it look a lot nicer because that way it would really feel like there's depth here. And right now, although it does feel like there is depth, because there is depth, it'll look even better if you had like pillars coming out with this depth inside. That's why typically when you look at modules are trying very hard to do what trim sheets cannot, right? Trim sheets are great for flat textures, but when it comes to module walls, especially walls, you really want to make it pop out, right? In fact, this is what they use a lot for things like Tomb Raider, because of course Tomb Raider they don't really use structures. It's more of tons and tons of modules for their cave levels. Okay, so I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to show today. What I'll do is after I dismiss class, I'll leave class open for a bit. So if anyone has any questions they want to run by me, for sure they can do that. We'll do breakout groups, one-on-ones. And what we'll do next week is going to be one-on-ones for the assignment that is due tomorrow. So just make sure if you haven't finished it already, your assignment is due tomorrow at the end of the day. Um, and again, if you have any questions, you can always come to Studio Lab as well. All right, guys. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, take care, and I'll see you guys next week. So the test is going to be on week 14. It won't be next week. The test is going to be retypology. Oop, shared the wrong thing. Breakout groups. Okay. So I create some breakout groups. So if you guys want to join, you can go ahead. If not, I will see you guys next week. If you have any questions about your assignments, you can definitely ask me today or tomorrow. Take care, guys. Your exam will be on retypology. Correct. That's what retypology is. I give you a model, you'll have to retypologize it. Pretty much. So retypology directly reference to making a low poly based on the structure and silhouette of the high poly. The final assignment. The final assignment is the final diorama. Okay, so I'm going to be joining the breakout groups. If anyone wants to join, you can continue on. And I'll make sure to reply to any emails by the end of the day. So I did notice I have 1 or 2 emails I haven't replied to yet. If you click on the participant list, yeah, there we go. So I see 2 people waiting. So if anyone else wants to join, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm going to be joining right now. All right, guys, take care. If you guys haven't done your assignment yet, just keep working on it and best of luck. Hey,